Before we jump into today's deep dive, just a quick heads up that this episode deals with fairly distressing content, things like sexual assault and sex trafficking. If you do choose to listen to this episode, please listen with care. Help is always available at 1-800-RESPECT. Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara.
I'm Emma.
Earlier this month, rapper Sean Diddy Combs was denied bail after he was charged with sex trafficking and a slew of other crimes. Investigators accused Combs of using his business empire to cover up decades of abuse against women to, quote, fulfil his sexual desires and protect his reputation. Now, in today's deep dive, we're going to explain the timeline leading up to those charges and what it could mean for the rapper next.
Okay, Zara, so today we are talking about Sean Diddy Combs, aka P. Diddy, aka Puff Daddy, a string of allegations that he is currently facing. Now, this is a story that's completely rocked the music industry, the entertainment industry more broadly, and it has really far-reaching implications. But let's start from the beginning. There are a lot of layers to this, as we'll get to. For anyone who isn't familiar with this story, with this man, who is Diddy?
Okay, so Sean Diddy Combs, and you referred there to his many names. He's known as Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Puffy, and Diddy. He's a rapper and a producer. And just, I think for clarity, we'll just call him Diddy throughout this podcast because I think that's how most people our age would know him and would certainly be familiar with him through that name. So Diddy founded Bad Boy Records back in 1993, and that was a really big music label that represented some of the world's biggest and most famous rappers, including the notorious B.I.G. He's a 3-time Grammy Award winner. He's worked with people like Mariah Carey, Mary J. Blige, Usher, and Faith Evans. He's also done a bit of acting. He starred in Monsters Ball, Get Him to the Greek, and Draft Day. And I do really just want to say here, I'm not, running through his resume for any reason but to show the extent of Diddy's power. He kind of had this power that wasn't just contained, as you said, to the music industry, but more broadly, he had really shaped the foundations of the entertainment industry.
And even as a businessman, you might know him from Ciroc Vodka. He is an entrepreneur in many different industries.
Yeah, so he was, until very recently, one of the most powerful figures in the entertainment industry.
So you've mentioned there very poignantly, until recently. So when did we first learn of the allegations against Diddy?
Yeah, so I think that it is important to go through this timeline because the news of this month didn't happen in a vacuum. There were previous allegations that kind of led to what happened earlier this month, and I'll get to that in a second. But we'll start with the first allegations that were levelled at Diddy, and they were in 2023, and they were made by former partner Cassandra Ventura. She's known as Cassie. She is a singer. So Cassie accused Diddy of sexual assault back then in 2023. At the time, her lawyers described him as vicious, cruel, and a controlling man. Diddy denied all of the allegations, and just one day after Cassie filed that lawsuit, the matter was settled out of court. Then in May of this year, CNN published, I think what can only be labelled as very disturbing footage that appeared to show Diddy kicking and dragging Cassie in a hotel hallway. That dated back to 2016. In a video to Instagram, Diddy apologised for what he called his, quote, inexcusable behaviour, but he didn't name Cassie in that statement. Cassie wasn't the only person to file legal action against Diddy in recent years. Earlier this year, music producer Rodney Jones, who goes by Lil Rod, filed a lawsuit against him. Jones alleged that Diddy spiked the drinks of minors and sex workers at his homes in California, New York, Florida, and the US Virgin Islands. When those allegations were made public, Diddy denied all of them. And then, if we're to follow this timeline, in March of this year, US authorities raided Diddy's properties in both LA and Miami. Those were part of ongoing investigations by federal authorities that culminated in a lawsuit very recently. But what we've since found out is that at his homes, authorities uncovered things like firearms, ammunition, and also more than 1,000 bottles of lubricant.
Okay, so that was in March. We knew that those police raids were going on, but we didn't really hear anything in the immediate aftermath of what was found. So since then, we can assume investigators have been working on this case against him, looking at the evidence recovered from those homes. And earlier this month, Diddy was arrested and charged in New York.
Correct.
Can you talk me through the charges that are now being levelled against him?
Yeah. So as you said, earlier this month, Diddy was arrested. It was then a day later that the charges that had been levelled at him were made public. So Damian Williams, who's the US attorney for the Southern District of New York, announced the charges against Diddy in a public press conference. We found out that Diddy was being charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage with prostitution. Here's a bit of the press conference when Williams announced those charges.
The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. As alleged in the indictment, to carry out this conduct, Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity.
Now, I know that there is a fair bit of legal jargon in those charges, so I think it's important to just explain what's being alleged here. Ultimately, what they're saying is that Diddy used his business empire to carry out this alleged criminal activity, things including sex trafficking, forced labour, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice.
Now, one of those charges, as you mentioned, uses the word racketeering. I think that's a word that kind of gets thrown around a lot. People don't really know what it means. But in this case, it just means making money from illegal activity. So the allegations are that Diddy has used his business empire for illegal activity and he makes money through that empire and through that illegal activity.
Exactly. And as you said, that's one of the charges, but one of, many charges. Authorities allege that Diddy used the pretense of a romantic relationship to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into his orbit. They alleged he would eventually force victims to engage in extended and elaborate sex acts with male commercial sex workers. And that really goes to the heart of, what is being alleged here, which is that Diddy would host, I don't want to use the word events, but that's really what is used here. He would call them freak-offs.
Yeah.
And according to the indictment, they were these highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity that took place in hotels and other places, and they were fueled by drugs and could go on for days. And those freak-offs are really at the centre of these allegations.
And that's what's really captured the media's attention and public interest. It's also mentioned in the indictment that many of those quote-unquote freak-offs were filmed and that Diddy would allegedly often film them himself. So he's observing women that he's allegedly lured in under false pretenses into these sexual situations that he films them for, whatever purpose. Yeah. And that's also a really interesting part of this.
It is. And I think it's important to note that this isn't the first time that the public had learned of these freak-offs. It was actually also included in Cassie's original case that we spoke about earlier. In her civil lawsuit, she mentioned these freak-offs. She alleged that during these incidents, the freak-offs, she was forced to have sex with male sex workers while, as you said, Diddy watched, masturbated and took photos and videos. She claimed that drugs were supplied at these events and that she took them so that she could, quote, disassociate during these horrific encounters. And so in this latest indictment, we have once again heard of these same events that were echoed by Diddy's ex, Cassie.
And also the indictment mentions or alleges that these freak-offs date back several decades. It's alleged that there is decades of abuse at the hands of Diddy or organised by Diddy.
And according to the prosecutors, this is really where the racketeering allegation comes in because Williams, who I said led that press conference earlier this month, said that Diddy used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with supplies. And when those hotel rooms got damaged, they helped to clean it up. There they're referring to those freak-off events, but also to the alleged role that his business associates played in those events.
So several really serious allegations in this federal indictment from these recent charges, some that have been alluded to before in other legal proceedings. Diddy denied the allegations made by Cassie Ventura.
Yeah.
How has he responded to these new charges?
Yeah, look, in much the same way. He's denied these allegations too. I mentioned that earlier he was arrested, and after he was arrested, he pleaded not guilty to the charges. That's then, exposing the difference between this latest indictment and what Cassie's suit was, which was a civil suit, not a criminal suit.
Yeah.
So he was arrested in this instance. His lawyer has said that Diddy is innocent and that he will fight this until the end. His legal team had a really interesting line in their statement. They said he is an imperfect person, but he's not a criminal.
Right.
But they have said that he's looking forward to clearing his name. Diddy is currently in jail. He was denied bail because they believed he was too much of a flight risk and that it could happen that he could intimidate witnesses. So he is currently sitting in jail. And just an interesting, I think, thing to note is that People magazine actually reported that he's in the same jail space as Sam Bankman-Fried, who we've spoken about on this pod before, who was the FTX founder, who was convicted of fraud crimes.
The crypto king.
Yeah, exactly. He's currently serving a very long sentence for the crimes that he was convicted of. But Diddy certainly hasn't been convicted of anything yet. It's this pre-trial. He's been denied bail and he will await, that next court date to see what happens next.
The bail angle of this story is really interesting because it's pretty unusual for someone so high profile who is so wealthy on paper, we know that, to not be given an opportunity to post that bail and to, go and live their life while they await a court appearance. His lawyers have alleged that Diddy came to New York from his home in Miami in good faith as a measure to present himself to police to be arrested to hear these charges. Now, if that had happened, Diddy's lawyers say that it would have been nearly impossible for a judge to deny him bail. But before Diddy had a chance to hand himself in, again, reportedly, he was arrested. He was intercepted by authorities unexpectedly, or a surprise arrest. Now, that apparently makes it easier for a judge to deny him bail. So his lawyers are sort of suggesting some kind of conspiracy against their client, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and his lawyers were pushing for that bail to be at around the $50 million mark, but prosecutors pushed back and it turns out that he has been denied bail and is currently in jail.
Now, in that press conference where we heard from Williams, who's with the US attorney, he said specifically about the influence and the power of someone like Diddy that prosecutors wanted to very publicly show the community that it doesn't matter what kind of wealth.
No one's above the rule of law.
Exactly. No one's above the law, no matter how wealthy or powerful you may be. Okay, so some extremely serious charges. If Diddy is found guilty, what sort of sentence is he looking at?
Yeah, well, I think because there are so many charges, it can vary quite dramatically, but it's being reported that what he's looking at, if he is convicted, is anywhere from 15 years to life in prison. And, for someone, as we started this podcast, to go full circle, as someone who was at the top of an industry, across the globe, to be possibly facing life in prison, I mean, it's a remarkable story.
What a lot of people are waiting to see next in this case is if there will be other celebrity names that fall with Diddy.
Yeah.
So there are these rumors of these really lavish parties that Diddy was famous for hosting, these white parties where everyone all dressed in white. You might have seen some photos doing the rounds from the 90s and the early noughties, people like J-Lo, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kim Kardashian, other really high-profile names who have been closely associated with Diddy for decades and who are yet to say anything. So, what does that silence say in and of itself? Usher, really interestingly, a close friend of Diddy, has wiped all of his ex history. So all of his previous Twitter posts have disappeared. Now, that move from Usher might have meant absolutely nothing. It might be about something completely different. But there are certainly corners of the internet really waiting with bated breath to see what comes next.
Again, some pretty distressing allegations that are being levelled against Diddy. And if you do need help, it is available at 1-800-RESPECT. You can call any time. But thank you for listening to today's episode of The Daily Aus. We will be back again tomorrow. But until then, take care of yourself.